Hello and welcome back to Manipil. I wanted to do a little finalizing video on my deconstruction series on Bernardo Kastrup's The Universe in Consciousness, an article or paper, what the term would be, that he has online and there would be links below here, so you can go and read the whole thing if you want, or if you don't want to sit through my deconstruction, which is sort of, I guess, around 7 hours or something like that. But I show a philosopher that level of respect, that I am trying to deconstruct everything, or at least what I find to be the important. If there's something that is, of secondary interest to the main point, I might skip a few pages or something like that, or a few sentences, whatever, a chapter. But in general, I like to go deep because it's in the devil is in the detail, as they used to say, right? And this is more like my sort of kind of, I was just had my breakfast and I thought I would make a video before I had other tasks doing during the day. And I haven't come up with a sort of plan about what I want to say or anything like that. But it was more like I wanted to sort of, how far have I come in my understanding of Bernardo Kastrup so far, listening to the dude during something like between 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, and it reminds me that time flies, right? It seems as older you get, the faster times runs, right? I just think it's because that you are experiencing less and less and less compared to your youth, but that's another story. My video on time, but I did some time back, right? But I try not to get caught up in intellectual, what's the term I'm looking for? Get caught up in the language, right? The sort of in the intellectual, linguistic, harebrained, whatever, that I think that in these kinds of articles it's much prevalent by these philosophers, right? There's always something about it that unsettles me. Those metaphysicians, right? Those who say there is an external world. Well, I guess I'm on board with that, right? But then they jump out in that world and try to describe it. And that's unsettling to me, right? While at the same time they say that they are dissociated from it. So it's this leap that is when I deconstruct it, I find no philosophy there. There are a lot of words and throwing left and right. But when I try to push sort of just fallacies or just sort of something that sounds like it is something along those lines, I sort of, that doesn't work either. No, that's not the argument. And that's not either the argument, or that doesn't fit with that, or that's a fallacy. And when I get rid of it, there seems to be nothing left, right? Left, right. Left, right. There seems to be nothing left that I can sort of hang the hat on and say, that's the argument that enables you, first of all, to talk about that external world. And then the next argument that enables you to tell me what the hell it's made of and how it's put together, right? How it's composed, or whatever you want to call it. So, and these were the arguments I was looking for, right? Basically, at the outset, I said, I'm looking for possibly 2, but maybe 3 arguments, right? How do you get to the external world? How do you get to tell me what it's made of? And if it's made of the same thing, and even a different thing maybe, right? What is it made of, and why are they dissociated, to use his terms, right? What is it about? If you explain that what the outer world is, then you also have to explain sort of the heart problem, or whatever problem you find there, where the heart problem is for materialists, right? So the heart problem for Bernardo Kastrup turns into the dissociation problem instead, right? And I can't, it's like I can't help working from the idea that this is not about philosophy really, right? This is more about psychology. When people go into something they don't have direct access to and try to explain to me how it is composed and how it works, I am like, okay, crazy boy, right? Shut the fuck up, right? I mean, you're saying you don't have access to it and now you're going to tell me about it, right? I don't buy it. It's quite simple, right? To me, it's very simple. It's very simple. I can work from the idea that my experiences are representations. I don't necessarily have to say an external world, right? Because what would that be? Wouldn't that world be some abstraction that is inside me? A world is an abstraction that I have. So if I'm saying there is an external world, am I not putting my own abstractions into that thing I don't have access to, right? But there is a necessary doubt about the experiences, right? There's a necessary doubt in, maybe there's nothing that is necessary, but it's unavoidable in my thinking at least, right? That what I experience, is that it? Is the experience what is? Or is there more to it, to the experience, in the sense that there's something going on after the experience, so to say, right? Which is my point is, if I'm having my experiences, and I'm only talking about the sensual experience, I'm not talking about pain and pleasure and desires and so on, right? Because in my opinion, they all are following from experiences one way or another, not in a causal manner, but they're correlated, right? And if I hadn't any of the sensual experience, I wouldn't have desires and pains and all that either. That's my axiom, right? So I don't need to talk about those before I have settled on the ontology of my experiences, right? So I'm saying, how does it work if I dig down into my own experience and try to establish the foundation, the reduction base, right? What I personally get to are the five senses: the colors, the sounds, the taste, the feel, and the touch, right? Those are the ground floor. I cannot explain red, for instance, right? I cannot reduce it any further without just getting rid of it, and then there's nothing left, right? The other four senses, you could say, are left. But then I would have to do the same thing with the other four, and then I would be left with nothing, right? And some people might say, no, there's still something left. What would that be? Because it can't be elephants or bicycles or tomatoes, right? Because I only have the idea of the tomato because it was possible to have some sensations or some qualia that enabled me to cognize elephants and tomatoes and bicycles within my experience, right? And that makes me say that I'm working from the axiom that all concepts like elephants and bicycles and tomatoes are derived from direct experience. If there weren't that direct experience of sensual qualia, I wouldn't have any cognitions either, right? And but at the same time, I am convinced about my own general experience that I'm not in control of my cognitions. I'm not in control of whether or not I am experiencing elephant or not. I can sort of maybe adjust the likelihood that I'm going to experience elephant. For instance, if I drive to Africa or I go to the nearest zoo or where I believe, but there's no guarantee, right? It's only when I experience elephant, for instance, that I am experiencing elephant. So, in order to explain what the hell is going on there, right? Because if elephants is purely something that I'm adding to the picture, why am I adding that to the picture if I'm not trying to interpret what is going on? And what might be going on is not in the experience itself, but beyond or before my experience. So the mind is trying to second guess from the experience on the inside, using cognitions, what might be on the outside. That's why I'm saying I'm working from the idea that what Bernardo Kastrup calls perceptions are intermediary for me to cognize various shit, and these cognitions is the best bet on what might be on the other side, right? And I am inventing that other side, so to say, axiomatically, as a way to explain why my mind is trying to cognize shit, right? That makes sense to me, but I'm still working on the inside, mind you, right? I'm working from the experiences, I'm working from the cognitions, right? I'm working by ontologizing my experience further down the line into the I of the I think, therefore I am, right? So I'm mapping out my whole experience and creating interdependencies in order to clarify. And I can actually work from that external world that I just established axiomatically. But I'm not telling you what it is. I'm sticking to my own experiences, my cognitions that I am treating as if they were representations of an outside, right? And that's why I'm very, very, very concerned about his very loose representation here of cosmic consciousness, right? This is also it's a very, very, very big statement, right? Cosmic consciousness. I usually get that notion that when you hear him talk about his ontology or metaphysics, right? It's like he's very slow in his language and trying to, when we're dealing with sort of the materialist or direct access things. But as soon as he lets go into that metaphysical realm, he just lets rip, right? He uses, cosmic this and in universal that and all over the place, right? Because there is no boundaries to him then, right? He's left the empiricism behind. And that's also a reason why I'm saying you cannot fucking use, first of all, you cannot use empiricism. But if we are giving him the slack and say, okay, so if you have some direct experience, you might quite quickly establish an idea of what part of that experience is knowledge, and that would be some kind of empiricism based on these direct experiences, and so on, right? Something like I just did. If you give him that, then at least when he stays within his own experience, he has access to empiricism. But as soon as he leaves his own experience and jump out into that meta realm, he leaves empiricism behind, right? I would say that possibly I will willing to go and say you can use empiricism or use empiricism as a stepstone to say, I think I'm working from an outside world. But from that point on, you have to leave empiricism behind. Because that's what you're doing when you're saying an outside world. You are outside empiricism then. Right? That's why I'm seeing when he does that, all of a sudden his vocabulary is, exponentially amplified, right? Into all sorts of shit that he just can come up with, which is a sign that he has left any kind of control mechanism behind. Because he wants to go there and fabulate about this magical world. It's not really that magical to me, but it's sort of a free fall, or a buffet of whatever you want, right? And this picture of cosmic consciousness here that he has shown at some point in the recent article I deconstructed, right? That it's not it is quite stupid, this, right? First of all, if these circles or spheres, maybe I should say, but let's just call them circles, because in this paper they are circles, right? I don't want to put something into it I don't see in the picture, right? These circles that are potentially representing spheres, I suppose, right? The perception must be on the borderline of that, on the inner side of the dissociation, as far as I understand his description. That's where the perception is, right? Now, the point is, if he is an alter, Mr. Bernardo Kastrup, he is sitting inside one of these balls, right? And his only access is that perception that is on the inner side of that ball. So how can he describe to me any situation where he's sitting and looking at somebody else as a ball, right? How can he possibly do that? It's like he has stepped out of his own bubble, and now he's sitting out there in his fairy tale land and looking down on his imagined bubbles, right? You can't do that. He's violating his own experience, right? So he wants to jump into some imaginary wonderland where he can come up with shit that at the end of the day, as I pointed out several times, doesn't explain anything. It's just sort of a conjured up story where he just says, yeah, and then it will look, the tomatoes and the bicycles and the elephants look the same. It's the same experience, right? I've just come up with a story that might change how you understand the experience. But then that's a circular argument then, right? If you're using you have some perceptions and you're saying, oh, that's weird, I have perceptions, why they come from? I think I can establish from those perceptions, I'm taking them literally in order to say, okay, there must be something outside those perceptions. And then he comes up with this elaborate story about what's going on, and then he comes back, as these arrows point to, he comes back to perception and says, now I have explained those perceptions. No, you haven't. You cannot possibly, because it's all circular. You're using the perceptions to talk about an external world. Right? It's because of the perceptions you're talking about an external world, otherwise you wouldn't. There wouldn't even be any talking. There wouldn't be any thinking, whatever, right? Thoughts of any kind. It's all because of these perceptions. To use his term, I don't like that term perception in this context here, because it presupposes some shit in that term, right? And then he comes back to the perception again, and then he says, now I've explained the perceptions. No, you haven't, because you are using a circular argument where you are taking perception, making abstractions to explain the perceptions. That doesn't work. It cannot possibly work, right? And a further thing, not only does he sit outside his own bubble looking at other bubbles, right? But he's trying to say, when I see that whatever dude there, the black thing, right? But that's not outside. You cannot possibly see other people's minds, right? Because that thing you're seeing there, that's just some representation that is one of your perceptions. That thing is not out there beyond somebody else's perception. If you're saying this, it cannot be your perception, right? If you're sitting inside one of these bubbles, A1, A2, and so on, right? You cannot see that. Whatever that black thing is, right? It's part of your perception. It's impossible. And you should, all these things, the A2 and this is just some imaginary shit you're coming up with. It's not even a perception, it's an abstraction. And if you have access to that abstraction, it must be a part of your experience, right? In the broader understanding of experience. He would call it mind, maybe, right? But I would say all experience, the colors, the concepts, the thinking, the imagination, all of it, right? If that's sort of in general experience, then all of this is a part of that experience. Well, that is inside one of these altars, right? So it's basically just a solipsist talking about his own experiences, right? Now, one way he might get away with some of this is to say, as I do, I can only work from inside this bubble, right? And then I have to get rid of the rest because it's pure imaginary, right? Purely imagination. So if I get rid of that, there is no longer any outside. Which means there is no inside either, right? So why am I talking about this inside-outside? Well, then you might go into a series of philosophy of thinkings that I just mentioned. Well, when I look at from the inside and classify this, the only way for me to, there might be other ways, but my way of making sense of it is to say, I'm working from the idea of a representation, but I cannot get to what it is being represented. I cannot get to the thing itself, to paraphrase Immanuel Kant, right? I cannot possibly get to the thing itself. I have to leave it alone, right? I can work from the idea how I approach, understand my experience. That I'm anchored always in my experiences. I'm just interpreting them in a particular way that entails an outside, but an outside I do not have access to, and I cannot get to, and I should leave the fuck alone, right? And it has to be clearly stated that I would say either that you're saying yes, I'm working from an external world, but I cannot get to it, or if you think you can get to it, how the hell do you do that, right? I would reject it because I would be willing to listen, but I fucking bet you it's going to be bullshit, right? And please try if you can. I would like to know, right? But I'm going to deconstruct it. So it's I'm just. You could sort of go into why would anybody want to go there then, right? What is it? Well, there might be one point which is somebody sitting there thinking and coming up with this idea of an external world, or maybe working from, used to work from a materialist point of view and then realizing materialism is contradictory or paradoxical, right? And then saying, well, then it's all my experiences. It's not the outside world that I have direct experience of. It cannot possibly be. Then I would both be inside and outside at the same time or something like that, right? So it's ridiculous. But then keeping that idea of the external world, even though you have just refuted it, if you step from the materialism into idealism, or you step away from the external understanding in materialism into maybe solipsism, you could say, rather, right? Some Cartesian doubt scenario, right? Then that external world idea is not very likely. It's not likely that you're going to say, well, then I have to get rid of that also. That was just something I took for granted when I was a materialist. I'm no longer a materialist. Why would I take that still for granted? I just refuted it by saying, no, it's my experience, right? And that's the exercise of realizing that the inside-outside dichotomy is just habitual thinking. It's not based on philosophy. It's not based on any rigidity of thinking that you arrived at the external world. And that's one of the critique points. I have a very, very, very big critique point of Bernardo Kastrup is he keeps that external world as if it's still given to him somehow, right? As if he doesn't have to explain how he gets to it. I have no patience with that, because that's all his philosophy is dealing with. It's that outside world there, right? He's so hung up on. And how does he know about it, or how do you get to it? Don't need to explain, right? I used to think about it. I used to take it for granted. Then I refuted it because I became an idealist. But I still keep that external world as if it's given to me. It's even less given to you now that you have refuted materialism, right? So, and it is possibly very hard to be self-critical, and it's also, he's so cocksure about his philosophy that he has created this foundation, essential foundation, and he has been on the YouTube podcast train, and season 5 of Mind at Large, right? Episode 16 of season 5 of Mind at Large. On the podcast, what's it called, circus, right? Where you jump from all these podcasters and go on YouTube. What's it called? Joe Rogan, and what are they called? The more listeners they have, the more important they are seemingly are, right? Not a small channel like mine who's critical of everything, right? But in any case, you are very invested in your philosophy then, right? It's hard to backtrack and say, there's a foundational error in my thinking. I have to go back to all the podcasters I've been to the last 8 years or something, right? And tell them, no, I was actually wrong in my, please delete my, what. You get, there's a lock-in effect for your philosophy. Then when you go out and create a foundation, an ideology basically, right? You create a philosophical ideology, and you name it as, analytic idealism. This is my own philosophy, right? And you being labeled as the the modern renaissance of idealism, right? He's the banner boy for. It's like, give me a fucking break, right? And when you have been locked into this, you're not going to be self-critical anymore, I believe, right? Not in the foundational shit. There might be small adjustments here and there that you can sort of get away with, but you're not going to accept me criticizing his the actual basic first leap that makes him able to talk about all this shit. I'm saying it doesn't make him able, but he's convinced himself that makes him able to talk about this shit. The sort of taking for granted that there is this thing out there, right, that can be described using his imagination, right? It's all crazy talk, right? It's all crazy talk. And there's so many, when I have deconstructed his video, right? There's so many things that, so many times he makes the same violation, you could say, right? First of all, he takes for granted that outside world. And he takes also for granted that he can go and use his imagination to come up with a story about what is going on, right? And then he can bring in empiricism that he just left behind by jumping into this meta realm, right? He has to accept that he cannot use empiricism. Well, then if you're using empiricism to describe that which is not empirical, you are violating foundational shit, right? When you say, I have read all these, scientific articles about this, that, and dissociation and whatever, right? And I'm going to bring in that to describe that. So it's merely just wishful thinking, right? It's the lack of, I don't know, today my vocabulary doesn't function completely. I'm only at 80% in my vocabulary today. I don't know what the hell it is. Sometimes it's just like, I don't have all words present to me today, right? But the uncertainty and the there's a word I'm looking for, there's a better word than uncertainty. The uneasiness of not having if you take my way of approaching it, right, by saying my my experiences, I treat at least some of them as a representation of an outside, right, and everything else in my experience are derived from these first experiences, right? I have the colors and sounds and taste, and then I have the cognitions among these experiences, which are the elephants and the bicycles and the apples, right? And from that follows the rest of what is going on in me, right? Including the awareness of it. So I'm staying within my bubble, so to say, right? And that makes me say, well, why would I think I am in a bubble, right? What is it about these experiences that necessitates that there is an outside? Well, if you come up with the explanation that says, I'm working from the idea of an outside, it's hard not to start saying, I wonder what might be out there, right? It's hard not to, it's hard to say, stay put and say, no, I can't go there, right? It's like, it's tempting. And it's also tempting because there's an uneasiness about working from the idea that what you have is not the actual thing, but only a potential representation, right? It's sort of an uneasiness of you're jumping into pure subjectivity here, right? There's nothing that is sort of settled, because you can only say, this is my experience, right? You have to work from, this is what I am. This is how I work. You cannot say, this is how it is, because you can only talk about yourself then, right? That pisses a lot of people off, right? Maybe that pisses them off, but that creates this, I guess I have to stand my own ground now, right? Rather than being an authority telling other people, this is how it is, and you should sort of just sit down and shut the fuck up and listen to me, right? Which is sort of the back doorway he's taking into, you should just pay attention, right? I have figured out that there is a big mind out there who wants to talk to you, and you just sit down, shut the fuck up, and pay attention. And then at the end of the day, right, when you realize what he's doing, he's given you so much doubt about what is going on there that you cannot decipher whether or not it is the big mind or it's an alter called Bernardo Kastrup who has come up with some shit, right? He's creating that blurry thing that the mind might just be working through him in order to tell you that you should obey, right? And it's like, oh my fucking God. Is this the completely mental, crazy, weird, imaginary avenue you have to take in order to say, you little peasant over there, you just fucking obey your masters, right? Because that's what I think he's doing. He wants you to shut the fuck up and obey, right? Oh, he looks like he's very nice little guy with glasses, very humble, and oh yeah, I'm also open for Buddhism and Islam and religion. I'm open for all kinds of craziness, right? But rigid deconstruction like mine, no. I have to be shot, right? Ultimately, I have to be threatened into submission that I cannot criticize his fantastic philosophy without risking being shot by his government, right? We can't have that. Sorry, but I'm screwing around here with the text. Sorry. We can't have that, right? So I have to live in fear of the big mind, right? And he would say, well, it's just the big mind acting through me. I'm just doing what I'm told because I pay attention, right? So it's sort of, he can rid himself of all responsibility this way, right? While at the same time bossing you around and telling you there's a big mind out there watching you, right? Telling you shit, and you should pay attention, and you should be observing, because he wants to suck you dry in X number of years to get your spy logbook, right? The human mind, let's say, right, is fascinating. But it's also fucking dangerous, right? You have to make sure that you align yourself with the right people. And how do you do that, right? Because if there are some people who you shouldn't have aligned yourself, but has force aligned themselves with you in your childhood and your youth without you being able to do anything about it. There is something in human psychology that says, I'm going to align with them in this sort of Stockholm syndrome kind of fashion, right? And that's the weakness that is built into the system, so to say, right? That the grown-ups are conspiring against children to destroy the mind insofar as they are unable to see that they are being destroyed, or they are at least being manipulated, right? They actually attach themselves to their manipulators, rather than saying, I have to think for myself, right? And all these people who have the mind more or less destroyed by the grown-ups when they were children, they kind of flock to people who can cushion them in their freaky philosophy, right? In their freaky understand of what is going on. And he just takes advantage of it, Bernardo Kastrup, right? Because, first of all, he's possibly one of them, right? And secondly, he wants to have this, the modern Renaissance movement where they're on the crusade of idealism, right? Well, all I see is basically just the Pied Piper of crazy people, right? And I don't mean in a derogative fashion. You have to wake up yourself. Nobody can wake you up. But there are a lot of people who are trying to take advantage of your weaknesses, right? Because it's beneficial to them somehow, right? So, as I say, the world is run by psychopaths, crazy people, and useful idiots, right? It's just a matter of figuring out. There's a few, very, very few people who are as self-sufficient in their thinking as I feel that I am, right? There are very few of us, so to say, right? Because I would even push back against somebody who says they have the same kind of philosophy as me. I would deconstruct them also. I wouldn't say, oh, welcome, you are aligning yourself with my philosophy. I would be very sort of, why are you aligning with me? What is it? Have you found a flaw in my philosophy you can take advantage of? Or, something like that, right? I'm ultra skeptical. Ultra, doubtful, right? And what I'm skeptical and doubtful about is my own adherence to my own philosophy, right? One of the spin-offs of these kinds of deconstruction is it's not merely because of whatever philosophy I'm deconstructing. It is I am pounding it against my own philosophy in order to hone my own philosophy, right? I am by using somebody else's philosophy, I am smashing it against my own philosophy and finding weaknesses and holes and strengths also maybe, right? That sort of solidifies and optimizes my own philosophy. That's basically the exercise I'm doing. And the only decent way of doing it is both showing the respect to the philosophy I'm deconstructing by taking it sentence by sentence, right? Which he of course won't allow me. He will probably say you can only use half of it. Yes, you have to take out of context fallacy in order to do it correctly, right? So he's forcing me to have a fallacious approach to his philosophy in order to say that's the way you should do it, right? But I'm taking it sentence by sentence as far as I'm allowed to without having the threat of murder hanging over me, right? Because that's the respect I should show the philosophy and the only way I can get to any decent challenge of my own philosophy. So I hope this makes some sense to you. At least it makes a good deal of sense to me, right? And I'm not waiting for any kind of philosophical savior to come and, create a new renaissance of this, that, or the other, right? There have probably been so many, saviors of philosophy through the years, right? Who say, hey, I've come up with the perfect solution, right? This is how you do it, right? Not realizing that whatever you can come up with is always your philosophy, right? Because you do not have access to other people's experience. You have to be aware of that. You cannot tell them about their philosophy. You cannot tell them this is your philosophy. Because you don't have access to that experience you are actually describing, and that experience is your experience. So if you're telling people this is how you should think, you are violating a foundational principle, which should be, I can only say this is how I think, right? And that's why I'm constantly pounding on the principle that philosophy is the thinking about your thinking, right? Or my philosophy is my thinking about my philosophy. That's another way of putting it, right? Okay. Have a nice day. See you in the next one. Oh yeah, please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you for coming this far. And welcome to the new listeners, new subs. I hope you enjoy and I hope you stay. And I hope you share, like, and subscribe. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think of this. What's your opinion about my deconstructions and Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy in general, and so on and so on. Let me have it. Consider a donation. Links below, and there are links to crypto donation on the Discord forum. Links also below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.